When you begin modeling game props, the number one prop that you should model is of course a wooden crate. But the number two prop is probably a wooden barrel. So in this tutorial series, we're gonna go through how to model, how to UV, how to texture, export, import, and actually bring in a wooden barrel from beginning to end and use it inside the game engine. So in this first tutorial, we're gonna focus entirely on modeling. So first things first, let me cover just kind of the basics overview of what I have in the scene, this box, and the reference I collected, and what we are going to aim for. Number one is you have to collect photo reference of what you're going to create. This should be done for every prop, for every environment, for every single project that you do. You have to know what you're going to create. And you have to collect photo reference, not 3D reference, but actual object photo reference. Now I have a lot more than this, but this is just kind of a master reference sheet that I just compiled and threw a bunch of photos into it. So I have it all in one sheet. So this gives me an idea of what I'm going to go for, and it leaves all guesswork out because I'm going to pay attention to the reference as I model, what to include, what not to include, and so on. You should also do research on what kind of wooden barrel you're trying to create. Is it a wine barrel? Is it a whiskey barrel? What size is it? How heavy is it? What's the time that this barrel was used? And of course, it should all relate to your environment, what you're trying to create, what the time period is. So the number one reference that I usually recommend for sizes is Amazon. So here I went and I searched for a wooden barrel just to get an idea of how large this wooden barrel needs to be. And a lot of times you can find these dimensions on Amazon. Just search for the prop that you are creating. And here I found that this wooden barrel, a wine barrel, is 26 inches in depth and width and 35 in height. And it also weighs about 120 pounds. And actually, if you scroll down, there's product dimensions. And these are the dimensions that I actually started with. So then you take these inches and then you convert them to centimeters. So width and depth, 27, height is 37. Everything in Maya is based on centimeters. So you just need to convert this to centimeters. And 27 inches is about 68 centimeters. And 37 is 93 or almost 94 centimeters. So I usually round these numbers up, and that's what I start with the size for the prop. And then I adjust it based on the scale reference. And I usually make it a little larger than the real world dimensions to make it a little bulkier, because in the game, the props tend to be too small if you just stick with the real world references. So I usually inflate them a little bit. So now that I know the sizes, what to start with, and I have my reference, let's begin modeling. So let's start with a cylinder. And I already have my primitive shapes that I use, the polygonal primitive shapes on my tool shelf. So that's what I'm going to use. Most of these are found in Create Polygon Primitives, and they're right here. It's just a quick access for me on the most common shapes that I use. So I've created this cylinder, and let's go into the Input tab, and I'm going to set radius to 34. Radius is half the size of the width of the barrel that we saw the dimensions for. So this is in centimeters. So obviously 68 would be too much, and radius is half of that. So 34. And then height, it is 93. So I'm going to punch in the values that it gave me from my dimensions, but then I'm going to adjust it. Now let me go ahead and move this scale box right in here. So this scale cube is a way for me to judge proportion and dimensions of my objects, of environments that I create. And this cube is set to 50 by 50 in width and depth, and 180 in height. So this is about 6 feet. And these are the dimensions in Unreal Engine 4 for a basic standard human height reference. So let's go ahead and I'm going to lock it back up. And let me go ahead and position this on the ground plane. Just estimate it first. So by default, I think it's a little too small, so I'm going to just increase the values a bit. And I'm going to punch up the height to 100 centimeters. And for radius, I'll go up to 35, so it's a nice round number. And then we'll increase the kind of the round form of the barrel with other tools. But this is what we're going to start with. I'm also going to change my subdivision axes from 20 to 24. I tend to like using 24 better. So when it comes to segments on a cylinder, I go from 8 to 16, 24, or 32. I don't like using 20. And I'm going to go ahead and modify my pivot point. Hold D, V, middle mouse click and drag. So that way I can snap it on top of the ground plane. And I'm going to be working in world origin. And I'm going to be working on positive Z. This is kind of like my standard scene orientation as I create props. Now we could insert an image reference plane and assign some kind of an image of a wooden barrel on there and then model to it. But I think for this prop we don't need to. We can eyeball everything. And just off my screen I always look at my reference as I'm modeling. So it's never blind, just me and Maya. It's always going off of something I'm looking at on the side of the screen. And I'm going to be looking at this right here. Now I'm not going to create this super low poly, and I'm not going to create it too high poly. So it's going to be somewhere in the middle, but I'm going to try to avoid going too high. So my aim is to be anywhere between 1000 to 1500 triangles. So this will help me kind of determine what kind of detail that I insert, how many bevels that I include, and how far do I push this. So since I kind of want this prop maybe duplicated dozens of times, maybe hundreds of times, and maybe reused over and over again, I'm kind of setting a stage ahead of time of what my ultimate goal is going to be for. And I'm just kind of picking a number of what I feel comfortable with this prop, because I know it's going to go into UV4. Now I know some of the triangle limit is becoming more and more irrelevant, but it's still good to have some sort of a base to start with. It really helps you to decide how much detail you include and how much you have to leave out. So let's go ahead and insert additional edges so we can round out the form to this barrel. So I can go ahead and maybe select all these edges. And let's go to Model and Toolkit. And I'm gonna maybe hit connect. And let's see, maybe 3 to start with, and I can start rounding the form out. And maybe I'll include more. So let's start with this. I'm gonna hit enter. Let's go into the front view. And I'm gonna use the scale tool and I'm gonna start scaling. And I'm gonna start scaling on X, Y, and Z together, like so. I just like using the front or side view for some of the scaling, and start rounding the form. And then I'm gonna select just this middle edge by double clicking on it, and then I'll also scale it out. And then maybe go back to all 3 and scale it out even more. So I'm just trying to find that right kind of shape, rounded shape for it. A lot of times I work on wireframe unshaded, but then if you press Alt 5, you can switch over to shaded mode. You can see how rounded the form is. It's less distracting when you don't have those lines. And then you can jump back to Alt 5 to go back on the wireframe unshaded. Now I should probably go ahead and insert additional edges in here to round out the form even more. So I usually start with a lower amount of divisions, so I can just work with it. It's easier to control, and then if you need more, you can insert more edges. So I think I'm pretty happy with this. Maybe just scale it up a little bit more. Yeah, it's a constant adjustment in the beginning, try to get the right shape for it. And then maybe I'll insert additional ones in here. So let's insert additional edges right across everything in between the ones that I already inserted. And I'm going to use multi-cut for this. I'm going to enable multi-cut. And I can use, by holding down Control, middle mouse clicking, is going to insert an edge right in the center between these 2 edges. So Control, middle mouse click. However, this inserts a straight edge and it doesn't kind of follow the form. I want to round this out a little bit as I do this. So inside the multi-cut, there's an option for edge flow. If you go ahead and enable this, this will begin to round out and kind of average out the form better. So hold Control again, middle mouse click. So for that part, I don't actually want this, but for this part right here, it'll work pretty nicely. Control, middle mouse click. So that's rounding out the form more. I'll disable edge flow, and I'm going to go ahead and do this manually for these. Let's go back to the edge, and I'm going to scale it slightly, just a little bit, not too much. Let's go back to edge, scale that one out. Let's take a look. Alt 5. Alright, that's looking good. Next, let's include these rings right here. So since I'm not going super low poly, I am going to extrude these so we have a bit of a silhouette change. and we'll see if we're going to bevel any corners or not, but I do want to extrude these. So depending on the type of barrel you're creating, if you look around, some of these have only 4 rings, 2 at the top, 2 at the bottom. Some have 5, some have 6, like this one. So you just have to determine how many of those do you want on your barrel. So I'm going to go ahead and do 6. So I'm going to do 2 at the top, 2 in the bottom that are very close, and then 2 in the middle, a little further apart. So let's do that. So I'm going to come in. I already have these edges that I can utilize and begin to do something with them. And I do want to keep them somewhat the same width, so they're like almost identical going across. So for this, I can utilize a single grid unit in order to kind of position the amount of how many centimeters they are, how thick they're going to be. So I'll probably do that as well. So first, let's go ahead and insert the geometry that we can start using. I'm going to go to edge. I'm going to select this edge, and I'm going to hit Control B to bevel. What beveling an edge will do, it will insert another additional edge. It will kind of break up one edge into 2. And then I can adjust my fraction for it. Now, actually for this one, I like it as is because it already gives me that top and the second one right here. So I like that. I'm going to keep that one. I'm going to do the same thing to this edge, Control B, and I'll leave it as is. I may move these down, but I think the distance between those two is pretty good. And then I can do the same thing for this edge and for this edge. And those should be a little further apart. So let me, if I do them together, I actually want to do them separately so I can control the distance. So I'm going to select this edge right there, double click on it, Control B. Let's adjust the fraction for this, maybe 0.25. I will want to maybe move these down, and I think the distance should be a little smaller. Let's do 0.2. And let's select this edge and Control B and also fraction of 0.2. So the distance between these is 2 the same. I want to maybe start modifying this a little bit. So, but it does give me this ring right here, this ring, 3, 4, 5, 6, exactly how I want it. I just want to control it and adjust their distances. So here is where you'll have to probably do a few things in order to keep them the same. Right now they look very identical in terms of their width, like their height in distance. If you want to start modifying some of them, you can just go ahead, double click on a single edge and then hold Control Shift, and this will slide that edge and you can modify it. So this will preserve the, it'll slide the edge and preserve the curvature. However, when I start doing this, now I'm losing the distance between the two edges. And I will have to kind of control that. I can do it, eyeball it. Or I can change my grid, go to Display, Grid, Options, and change my grid temporarily from 10 centimeters per each grid unit to maybe 1. And that way I can slide them and kind of control the distance, and then I will count how many units here, how many units in the bottom. So at least it's similar in size. Not going to be identical, I'm not worried about that. But at least it will be similar from top to bottom. So let me say 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 units here. This space right here is going to be 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. So about 5, 6, and let's take this one right here. Actually, I'm going to slide this one down. Right about there. Slide this one down. I'm holding down Control and Shift and middle mouse, click and drag to slide. So it's giving me 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, about 5 units right there. So the distance for these is about 5 grid units, a little bit more. And then between here for the distance, it's going to be 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 7.5 or so. Let's go to the bottom and do the same thing. Double click. So I'm going to leave that one alone. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. It's the same. Take this one, slide it, double click to select the entire edge ring. Control, Shift, middle mouse, click and drag. So it's going to be 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. And this one is going to be 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, right about there. And just checking, taking a look. Another way you can check is just create a box, a simple cube, scale it, just kind of get the size of it. and just compare. So that's the same. Drag it up right here. Now this is for, if you want to be a little bit more precise than just simple eyeballing. So that's very similar as well. And for this distance right there, if I just scale it up like so, that's the distance between the rings. And I can just drag this one down and compare, and close enough, but maybe just a little bit more. So I'll use this one, position it, select the edges, drag this one up, and drag this one up a little bit more. Here we go. So maybe I'll leave this maybe for later if I need it. And then for these two, I'll probably leave them as they are. So let me see, I'm gonna just highlight my faces, just to kind of see where they are. So here's what I'm gonna have. 2 at the top that are close, same on the bottom, and 2 in the middle. So I think that's pretty good. Let me go ahead and make a duplicate of it. So before I start extruding and kind of modifying the shape, let's say I want to adjust it later, maybe for whatever reason I want to go back and change it up. I usually create duplicates right before I do something drastic and do bevels or extrusions, and I usually contain them and have like a gallery or a graveyard of models that I dupe over, and I just move them up to the side. So let's go ahead and extrude all those pieces. So I'm gonna select this face right here, hold shift, double click on the face next to it, hold shift, select the second ring, and then continue to hold shift and double click on the face next to it. And I'm gonna continue doing this to select all of them. So that way I can extrude all of them together. So these are going to be my metal rings. Let's do Control E to extrude. Now, if I adjust thickness, you can see that it's gonna create a little bit of a curvature, a little bit of an angle to it. And it might be fine because I am gonna create them pretty small. So let me see what that looks like if I use a small amount of thickness. I might be able to get away with it. So let's do maybe 0.5. Let's go higher. Let's do 1. Probably lower. Now, if I don't want to have that curvature right there, I will have to do this separate, different way. I'll have to do this based on scale rather than thickness, or local translate Z. Because if I use local translate Z, this will do the same thing. So after I extrude, I can change this in the inputs tab, and instead of using thickness or local translate Z, I can adjust my scale, and scale will work a lot better. So for the scale, I could drag these, but again, I could change my transformation from object to world, and this will actually scale them straight, like so, and there won't be any angle to it. And after you scaled, you can see that my scale X and scale Z have been modified. So those are the two translate versions, orientation axes that I can now modify more precisely. So I can type in the number, so let's do 0.8 maybe, and then 0.8 for Z. Let me go back, it's actually not 0.8, so it's 1, those are the defaults. So I can do 1.2 and 1.2. That's going to be way too much. So let's go 1.02. 1.02. So that looks pretty good actually. So this is why if I went too far and I deleted history and I wanted to maybe update it, I would go back to my previous versions. So let me just kind of take a look, make sure that's what I want. You can check the silhouette of your object and see how it modifies by pressing 7. Now I have a test light that I use for rendering to check my model and geometry. So I'm going to go ahead and delete that light. So that gives me ability to take a look at nothing but the silhouette. And that's actually pretty good. I want to be a little maybe further away and notice how much of a silhouette that I'm changing. And I mean, it's noticeable enough. So if I go lower, I can go back to extrude face and I can maybe modify this, but I think 0.02 is pretty good. So let me go ahead and bring my light back. I'm going to go back to 5, to shaded mode, and Alt-5 for my wireframe unshaded. Alright, so that's our barrel kind of beginning, and we have the geometry for the interior metal parts. Let me go ahead and quickly readjust my grid back to 10 centimeters per grid unit. I'm going to go to display, options, and change it back to 10. All right, so the next step is let's create the indent on the top and the bottom. I'm gonna go ahead and duplicate this off. And let me go ahead and delete history on this. Select the faces of the top. I'm going to use tab, hold it down, tab, left click, hold and drag, will paint a selection. And same thing in the bottom. And let's Control E to extrude. I'm going to adjust my offset, create that lip for the barrel. And I think that's about good size. And I'm going to hit Control E again and add thickness and push that in. And again, I like to zoom out and look at my object, especially next to my reference scale, and see if I need to adjust it. And I think that's pretty good. Again, Alt 5, take a look at unshaded view without the wireframe. And I think that's looking pretty good. And let's take a look at the bottom as well, just to check. All right, everything worked out well. Well, let's fix these caps on cylinder. Usually you don't want to leave these alone like this. It's not clean geometry. There is a pole with 24 edges meeting at the same vertex. So let's clean this up. And I'm going to do this for the top and the bottom. I'm going to select my edges and I'm just going to select them and hit Control Delete. So you have to hit Control Delete when you are deleting edges, so you don't leave a stray vertice floating somewhere on top of the face. And now I'm going to go to Modeling Toolkit and let's do multi-cut. And I'm just going to connect them across and cut across and fix this up. So I do a cross section first, and then I just go across here and then go down to the bottom and just create this kind of crisscross pattern. And that fixes and removes that kind of nasty pole that it tends to create. And I'll have all quads. Not that I'm going for all quads, but I am going for all just clean geometry right about there. All quads at the top. Now let's do the same thing for the bottom. I'm going to select all the edges again here. Hold tab, paint selection, Control Delete. Let's get rid of the grid for a moment, hide it, go to multi-cut, and repeat. Let me hit backspace. So it's snapped to the vertex. And repeat what I just did at the top. Let me zoom out a little bit. So you just have to make sure you left click, hold and drag to snap to the vertex, and you're not creating an again by creating a vertex on somewhere in the middle of an edge. So you just have to make sure that they snap. It's very common that if you're not careful enough, then you're actually creating more problems in geometry. So that top is fixed, bottom top, and this part is fixed too. Alright, that's looking good. Let me bring my grid back. Go to object mode, Alt 5, just take a look. Alright, so let's go ahead and dupe this off again. Push it back, so I just have another copy if I ever need to come back to. Let me push these off to the side. And I actually don't need this little piece, but I'll keep it with the rest of them, just in case I ever need to in the future, for whatever reason. Alright, so here is a decision that I have to make, and you also have to make when you model. Do you add bevels, or do you leave it this low poly? At the moment, my triangle count is already at almost 1500. If I decide to add extra geometry in form of a nice bevel, especially maybe around here in the corners where the metal piece is, maybe this edge right here, then I am going to increase my triangle count naturally. Also, if I decide to input maybe kind of a rounded circle where there's like a plug, kind of a cork that goes into the wooden barrel, and I decide to actually circleize this area, part of the geometry, I am also increasing my triangle count. So you have to make a decision. Are you going to add more geometry and make it look good at the expense of more triangles, or do you leave it low poly like it is and then maybe create more of a cylinder that's overlapping geometry and just call that a cork? So it all depends what you're trying to achieve. What's your output? What's your goal? I always say it all depends. It all depends on what you're going for. So I'm gonna go ahead and leave this as is. I will duplicate it, and I want to take a look at all the additional detail that I will add, so that way I have a copy of it. And just in case you want to push this a little further. So let's say this is my low poly and I want to just, this is what I want to keep. And I'll probably add a little cork maybe towards the end. So let me do a duplicate, but before I do that, let me delete history, freeze transformations. I'm going to duplicate it off to the side. And then on this one, so that way I can compare, I'm going to add my bevels and I'm going to circleize the part and make it look nice. So let's go ahead and start selecting our edges. I'm going to select this edge, double click, hold shift, double click, and I'm going to double click on all of these on the outside, and I'm going to introduce one single bevel, just one. Because if I do two, that's going to be way too much, probably overkill, because this is a game prop. You know, this is not just for rendering. So I do want to kind of, when you introduce a slight bevel, even just one segment, it does make it to look nice. So it's not a 90-degree angle anymore, but it creates a slight 45-degree angle. So if you were to create a higher poly mesh, it'll look better with a normal map bake, as well as even if you just use it without normal map bake from high poly to low poly, that angle right there will look a lot nicer because it's going to pick up some of that light, even if it's just one segment. So I'm just double checking. I selected on my edges. The thing about beveling is make sure you select your edges. If you miss one, then you create an issues you have to fix, which is more time consuming. So I'm going to go ahead and hit Control B. So it jumps me to over 2000 triangles. So I'm going to come over here and you can see that I created a slight corner. Maybe I'll adjust my fraction maybe to 0.4. Let me see, 0.2 might be too small, 0.3. Let's do 0.4. Actually 0.3 I think looks good. Let's go back to object mode. I'm going to hit Alt 5 to remove my wireframe unshaded. I'm just going to take a look at the two versions. So that little corner right there is a lot nicer than that one, obviously. So even that right there, I think it's going to look pretty nice. It creates already a nice highlight just with this default gray shader. And then let's do one more on the inside right here. And I'm going to leave that one alone. I'm not going to touch that one. So let's do that one and also the one on the bottom. Because this barrel might be tipped over on the side, might be upside down. Let's do Control B, and then this is going to be a lot tighter. So let's do a fraction of 0.2, maybe even less, 0.1. Let's do I think 0.1 is good. I mean, if I'm going that far, maybe let's just even do that one. I'm already 2100. But I mean, if we're doing bevels, just might as well. So I'm going to go ahead and double click on all the rest of them. And let's do one more, so we do them together, the ones on the bottom. So again, for this, I just have to make sure I am selecting all of the edges. And let's do a bevel, Control B, with a fraction of 0.2, 0.1, yeah, and maybe let's do 0.075. There we go, a nice little highlight right there. So that looks a lot nicer. You can already tell. It's just some highlights that get picked up already. So, however, we did increase almost close to 1000, a little bit less, 800 or so triangles. Additionally, just trying to bevel everything and make it look nice on the edges. So let's do another pass, and I want to introduce kind of like a cork area. So that way we have even more interesting geometry on this barrel. So let me bring back my wireframe unshaded, Alt 5. Alright, so I'm going to do a low poly version first. I'm going to go ahead and just put a cork. It's going to be a floating piece of geometry. So I'm going to introduce a cylinder. And let's, before I modify anything, I'm just going to position it a little closer. Let's rotate it. Hold J and rotate. It will snap at 15-degree increments. So that way you can rotate it 90 degrees. And I'm just going to position it where it needs to go. Right about there. And let's go ahead and change my segment count. My subdivision axes on the cylinder. Let's do 16. Probably can get away with a lower amount. I could probably get away with 12. But let's do 16. And let's increase the size. So again, I just want to see how big it looks. Right about there. I don't want to have it stick out too far. Again, I'm gonna press 7 to check my silhouette. Let me delete my light temporarily. Alt 5. Right there, let me push that back in. Again, some barrels have a cork in the middle, some have on top. So it depends where you want to include it. Let me undo, bring my light back. Let me go back to 5. Maybe I'll want to include at the top. I'm not sure. It's like right now, this is a good time to just kind of test things out. You know, I am looking at reference, but at the same time, I do want to kind of see what looks good on top of my model. And I kind of like it at the top. So let me go ahead and delete that one. So for the top one, to keep it low poly, I would keep it just as is. So first I'm going to go ahead and delete the bottom faces. I will never see them. Let me select them, hit delete, and Control 1 again to bring everything back. And I would probably just fix that kind of that pole again. So let me do that really quick. Control delete, and I'm just going to use my multi-cut and reconnect everything like I did for the other part. Oh, let me undo just in case I didn't cut across somewhere by accident. So let me introduce this way. So this will be a lot quicker because it's only 16 sides. And one more at the top and one more right here. So maybe let's make it smaller a little bit. Push it down even more. Scale it down. Just want to intersect it a little bit. Right about there, and you can call that done. Low poly cork. That's going to sit on top. Now for the a little bit more involved, more high poly, I'm going to introduce one. Again, we can introduce one at the top. We can introduce one on the side. So for this one, let's do it on the side. I'm going to show you how to do this on the side. And we're going to actually extrude this part of the geometry. So instead of having a floating piece, we're actually going to introduce a circularized one here, and we're going to put a cork in it. So I'm going to go ahead and let me duplicate. Let me duplicate this, push it back, so we'll have a copy of it. And also duplicate this one as well. Put it back here. I think we already have a copy, but it doesn't hurt. So I'm going to come over here on the front, somewhere on the side, doesn't really matter. And let me select a single vertex right here. So I already have geometry here, and I'm going to select that one vertex, and I want to create more geometry to circleize. So what you can do is when you have a vertex, is select that vertex and then bevel it, Control B. So this creates area of geometry by splitting that vertex into 4 vertices. You can then select that face and go to Edit Mesh and Circleize. When you circleize, however, it circleized, but we don't have additional geometry in here to circleize. So you cannot circleize a quad. So we need extra divisions. If we had more geometry here to begin with, it would circleize. But since we don't, inside the circleize options, you have Add Divisions. So I'm going to add divisions to 1. So I can go higher to 2, but then I have to deal with a lot more triangles, a lot more vertices for me to terminate somewhere. And it might start kind of destroying some of that curvature of the form. So I think 1 will be enough. Plus, so it gives me 8 sides, and then I'll put a cork in it, and it will hide some of that low poly kind of extrusions. So I'll probably create a cork. No, actually, you know what? Let's go to 2. So that way we have a nice, it's going to give me 16 sides. Or close, I think it's 12. But it's going to look better, nicer rounded. And actually, I can use this as a cork already. So I'm going to select this face. Oh, let me go back to options. Anytime you want to bring options back, if you close them down, just hit T. Let me go back to object mode, hit T for transform or tool, and it'll bring that menu back. So here I can go back and re-enter. I want to change my alignment from automatic to surface per vertex or surface average. It will round out the form a little bit better, and it'll kind of follow the curvature of my barrel. So I think surface, so automatic, just a little bit too faceted, and surface per vertex, so actually looks better. And then maybe do a radial offset, make it a little bit larger. Let me zoom out. I want to just see how big I want that hole to be, right about there. Then I'm going to select this face and I can extrude that in. But before I do that, let me go ahead and terminate these, I don't have an gone. So I'm going to go ahead and go to multi-cut and just maybe terminate one here. Terminate one right there. Actually, I'll terminate both of them in here. That should work. That's a quad, that's a quad. Yeah, so let me try. I'm gonna go ahead and do this for all sides. And then I'm gonna take a look how my geometry is looking after I'm done. Let's take this face and I'm gonna extrude that in. Hold shift this time instead of control E. Hold shift, quick shortcut to extrude. I'll push that in. And let me disable Alt 5. And I just want to see if I'm destroying any of the shape. And it's not that bad. I can kind of see it, but through a texture, you'll be able to hide it. There's a little bit of a faceted space right there, just a little bit. But again, I shouldn't be able to see this with the texture. And I'm also going to double check my edges. I'm going to hold shift, right click, hold, soften harden edge, and let me toggle soft edge display just to see everything is smooth, and it is. Okay, good. Let me switch it back. All right, so I have this right here. I'm going to select this face and I'm going to just kind of cap it and scale it in so it's smaller and maybe push it back. I really no longer need that face. I can introduce another piece of geometry in here to kind of hide that. So I'm going to select this and I can actually extract it and use this as my starting point. So let me see. I may need to do a 16-sided cylinder. I think this one is it's only 10. Let me see how many edges it has. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12. I think, yeah, 12. So yeah, let me go ahead and delete this face. And then I'm going to introduce a 16-sided cylinder. So actually I can grab this one instead of having to recreate one. I'm going to hold J, snap, rotate, position it where it needs to go. Let me go to side view. Let's scale this up right about there. Let me push that back out. So that hides right there because I've scaled that face on the inside or the edge. And I'm actually going to do this more. I'm going to push that forward and scale it even more. So it creates a nice little self-shadowing and kind of extra geometry in there. So it's going to look really nice. And let me scale this one up a little bit. Let's go to side view. All right, about there. All right, here's our cork. Now let's push it even further. We're almost done with it. Now since we've kind of beveled everything else, might as well bevel this area as well. So I'm going to select this edge right here. And I'm going to bevel this. Control B. Small fraction with a segment of 1. Just keep it consistent. 0.05. Let's go higher. So we do want to see it. 0.7. 0.075. Here we go. And in here, I do want to bevel maybe this as well. But I do want to probably introduce, maybe not. Maybe let's select the vertices. I was going to introduce another edge in here to scale, but actually maybe I'll just scale this part right here. So it creates more of a cork-like look. A bit of an angle to it. Actually looks pretty good. And let me go ahead and select these edges all around. And I'm going to bevel them. Control B. And I'm going to do a segment of 1. Again, I don't want to double this up. 0.1. Let's hit Alt 5. And that's looking pretty good. And if I need to adjust it, maybe I'll want to push this further so it's not so far out. I'll just move the vertices back. And maybe scale them down a little bit. Let's go back to object mode. And here's what it looks like. Not bad. So overall, Let me take a look. It is 2,400 triangles. So not bad for, more of a medium triangle size triangle count prop versus my 1,500. So that's not too bad. Actually, it's going to end up looking a lot better, especially after it's textured and lit. We have a lot of highlights, a lot of edges that those highlights the light can pick up without having to introduce a bake. So this is more of a mid-poly type of modeling process for this particular wooden barrel. And maybe let's come back and fix this up as well. And then maybe select these vertices and maybe scale them out. Create, again, a cork-like effect. So not going to use this one. This was just a test to see if I wanted to push my geometry into more higher triangle count. And it turned out that I like this a lot better. So I do these kind of tests a lot. See if I want to do something more to a prop, or if I want to go back and continue with a different version of it. So in this case, it turned out pretty well that I want to keep the higher triangle count version. So let me replace this. So I'll keep that one. So here is the modeling process of a wooden barrel. Let's do a final few checks before we finish up the modeling. I'm going to go ahead and select everything. I'm going to combine both of these props as one, or both of these objects as one, combine. I'm going to remodify my pivot point to be at a bottom vertex. Hold D, X. Actually, not bottom vertex, right at the world origin on the grid. So that's where my pivot point for this barrel is going to be, so I can move it from there. I'm going to delete history, freeze transformations. Let's rename it wooden barrel. And I am going to do my one more test, which is going to be just checking for any problems with the mesh, specifically n-gons. So I'm going to go to mesh, cleanup options. Let me reset everything to default. And I want to make sure I select matching polygons because I don't want mine to clean things up for me. And I want to make sure that it's faces with more than 4 sides. I'm going to hit cleanup. If the mesh gets deselected, you have no n-gons. So I do not, which is perfect. So that is it. That is a modeling process for this wooden barrel. And in the next video, I'm going to show you how to UV this. So eventually we can take it further into Substance Painter and do texturing process of it.